Hi, welcome to the IBM Spectrum Protect 713 Technical Overview. My name is Trisha Jong, and today I'm going to walk you through the new features and functions that were introduced in the 713 version, which announced on September 1st and which is GAing on September 11th. I'll be covering the new features in the server, Operations Center, client, as well as Fastback for Workstation. My colleague Sean Sperry will be doing a similar YouTube video that will cover the other pieces that were announced in the Spectrum Protect announcement, and those are covered here on the right-hand side. As I go through this presentation, you may see references to Tivoli Storage Manager. As you might know, Tivoli Storage Manager is being rebranded Spectrum Protect. What you will see, though, is in the current version of the code and the technical documents, it is still referred to as Tivoli Storage Manager. The major new thing that's being introduced in this version is container storage pools. The nice thing about container storage pools is that you write the data to it once, and then you don't have to fuss with it. With the container storage pools, there is no reclamation, migration, copies, backups, land free, or anything like that. What container storage pools bring, though, is the new inline deduplication. So when the server is writing data out to these storage pools, the data is being deduped as it's being written. This is versus our old legacy dedupe, where it was an out-of-band dedupe. Now, both types of deduplication are still supported, but as you'll see on the next slide, there's many advantages to the new inline deduplication. So storage pools of the container type are going to bring to the table easier management, faster performance, and more scalability. And we're going to talk about that some more in the other slides. This chart walks through the differences between the next generation dedupe and the legacy dedupe that we introduced in version 6.2 and version 6.1. So let's go through these different columns here. The first one is your NextGen dedupe going out to container storage pools. When this occurs, we're actually deduping the data in line. When the client sends the data to the server, the data is going to be fully hydrated, and then it's going to be written out to a container storage pool. And this is in comparison to the legacy dedupe, where the deduplication is being written from the client to where the data is being rewritten from the client to the server, and then the deduplication is occurring out of band with the dedupe process and then with reclamation. It is also, when the client sends it to the server, the data is fully hydrated, but we are writing out to a file device class storage pool. Client-side dedupe is still supported with the container storage pools, as well as with the legacy file device class storage pools. So the client will issue and do the deduplication prior to sending it across the network to the server. So in both cases, the data is going to be dehydrated as it's sent across the network. But then it's either written to a container storage pool or a file device class storage pool. Some other differences have to do with encryption. We're introducing a new type of encryption in version 713, and we call that storage pool encryption, and that occurs on the server side. And server-side encryption is supported if you're writing out to a cloud container, and we're going to talk about the different types of containers in a minute. It is not supported with legacy dedupe, and it is supported if the client is writing it out once again to a cloud container. Utilizing the client-side encryption, which has been out there for a while, that is supported if you write either to a container storage pool or a device class storage pool, but in both cases the data is not deduped. Also, with client-side deduplication, the data is not being, it's not supported to have dedupe running with encryption. However, you can utilize SSL in order to protect the data across the network. We also introduced a new command called Protect Storage Pool. This is used for directory containers, and it basically is replicating just the data over to the target server. It is not replicating the meta information. Now, Protect Storage Pool works in conjunction with replicate node, and it's the replicate node which will actually replicate across the metadata. So protect storage pool is only supported for directory containers, and then the command that goes with the protect storage pool is a repair storage pool, and that allows us to repair damaged storage pools which are directory containers. Replicate node is supported with all types of deduplication, but the replicate node recover damaged equals yes is only supported for server-side legacy dedupe or client-side legacy dedupe going out to the file device class storage pools. Storage pool reclamation is not used on containers, but that will still be used on your legacy file device class storage pools. The TSM version that's supported, you have to be at version 7.1.3 in order to use the NextGen dedupe. And in order to use server-side, it has to at least be a 6.1 server or 6.2 in order to use the client-side dedupe. There are no special licenses needed in the Tivoli Storage Manager server or Spectrum Protect server to use either the NextGen or the legacy dedupe. Now these last three rows are interesting. These kind of give you an idea, and this is not a hard number, this is just kind of an estimate of the performance enhancements that come with using the next generation dedupe with container storage pools. You'll see that we can process about 80 terabytes per day of data going out to using server-side next-gen dedupe. And if you're using the client side, that goes all the way up to 100 terabytes per day out to a container storage pool. And this is in comparison to about 20 terabytes with legacy dedupe and 30 terabytes with legacy dedupe on the client side. The amount of data that we can manage on a single TSM server goes all the way up to 1.4 petabytes versus like 100 to 400 terabytes with the old dedupe. And if you want to look at physical capacity versus amount managed, then we can look at that as 1 petabyte of data with our new NextGen dedupe on one Spectrum Protect server. Okay, moving on to slide 6. So when you look at container storage pools, the first thing you're going to have to do as an administrator is set up those containers, and you're going to have to decide where those containers reside. And we support 3 locations. They either can be directory containers, which are file-based local storage using file system directories, or you can utilize cloud-based containers. And these would either be an on-premises or an off-premises cloud. And the only difference when you go to choose them, if you want to do an on-premises versus an off-premises, is basically who's managing that cloud. So if it's an in-house cloud, we consider that on-premise, versus a third-party cloud, we'd consider an off-premise. And we currently support SoftLayer, V1 Swift, and OpenStack Swift cloud computing systems. Once the containers exist, TSM is going to automatically manage those pools, those containers. It's going to automatically create them and delete them as necessary. And it's going to create 2 types of containers as needed. One is going to be a dedupe container, and the other is going to be non-dedupe, which will contain information like metadata or data that couldn't be deduped because it was encrypted. Spectrum Protect utilizes containers based by dynamically generating them, and it generates them based on file system size. And then it writes out chunks of data that we call extents out to those containers. And then as the space is freed up in the container, we'll try to write that data into the empty spaces so we can continually reuse the data inside of those containers. Now, containers are deleted when the storage pool directory containing the container is either updated or destroyed, or there's no more references to data out there. We do have a concept of defragmentation that will run very rarely, but it is a way for us to kind of reclaim space if needed on the containers, and I'll talk about that here in a bit. Now, container storage pools do not support storage pool backups, migrations, aggregations, reclamations, NDMP dedupe, data shredding, etc., etc. And this goes back to the philosophy of we want to basically write the data out to those containers and then not fuss with it. Now, in order to get the performance enhancements that you saw in that chart, one of the things we're looking at is the type of I/O we use to write to the containers. And so the first thing we look at when we are going to write out to a container is the data deduped? And if the dedupe is not necessary, if those chunks of deduped data already exist, then all we're going to do is update the reference count for that data. If we do need to write the data out, the first piece we're going to look at is it a small piece of work? If it is, then we're going to write it out using synchronous I/O. And the reason is asynchronous I/O would simply result in slower performance. If we have a larger piece of work, we will utilize the asynchronous I/O, and we'll basically chunk the write requests up into different work requests, and then those chunks are dispatched into a producer-consumer-based asynchronous I/O handler. Once the data has been written out, we do go back and test to make sure it was written correctly, and if need be, ask for it to be resent. When we write the data out to storage pool, we write it out into extents. And extents are basically just pieces of data that are going to be stored in those container pools. And they might be metadata, they might be file data, they might be deduped, they might not be deduped. But what they are is there's lots of chunks that make up one object. So an object is going to be broken into many different chunks. This extents allows us to easily dedupe the data and store it, and then easily match those deduped portions with new data coming in so that we don't have to rewrite already existing data. If you want to enable the new next generation dedupe, what you have to do is on the client side, you would have deduplication set to no. And then on the server side, you would need to define a new storage pool of type container. And remember, you can do either a directory or a cloud container. And then you'd have to update your copy group to point to that container. If you're using the Operations Center, there is a new wizard that you'll find in Storage, Storage Pools, and then you click on the plus Storage Pool icon, and it will walk you through creating a container. It'll also walk you through creating a traditional legacy storage pool. But when you choose to create a container-based storage pool, the first thing you'll decide is it a directory container or is it a cloud container. If it's a directory container, then you need a fully qualified path name, and that directory needs to already exist with read-write privileges. Now, in order to improve your I/O performance, you can distribute the data across multiple directories, but those directories should map to different physical disks out there. You do not want to use a file system that is the same as your Spectrum Protect database or logs. For the directory containers, you will be prompted in the wizard to create an overflow pool, and that overflow pool needs to either be a cloud pool or a primary pool on disk or tape. It can't be another directory-based storage pool. If you choose to create a cloud container, you're going to have to decide, is it on-premise or off-premise? You're going to need the URL, the password, the ID to access those clouds. And currently we support SoftLayer, OpenStack Swift, or V1 Swift clouds. You do not have to install anything on these clouds. There's no server or anything else out there running. We're just using it for storage as a container storage pool. Now with the container storage pools, if it is a off-premise cloud, by default we'll turn the server-side encryption on. Now you can go back and change that if you don't want it on, but by default that will be on. And then for an on-premise cloud, you can choose to turn it on if you want, but by default it'll be turned off. Now when we write to the cloud storage pools, we're utilizing object storage. And if you don't know what object storage is, if you look in Wikipedia, it defines it also as object-based storage. And that's a storage architecture that manages data as objects, as opposed to other storage architectures like file systems, which manage data as file hierarchy, or block storage, which manages data as blocks within sectors and tracks. So when we do write out to these clouds, we're basically doing what we do with a directory container, except that we're using this object-based storage, but we're still using the same dedupe strategy and still using the extents to write out to those. And obviously we're still automatically creating those containers and managing them in the cloud. So the customer does not have to do anything specific. One thing to consider if you're looking at using cloud storage pools is that there is a lot of I/O over the network, as well as other external factors that influence the performance. And so if you have a smaller network pipe or an OpenStack Swift environment that's kind of underpowered, this might create very slow results with a Spectrum Protect container storage pool. So in this case, this cloud container might not be your best bet for a storage pool. Okay, we do have a new Protect Storage Pool command, which is utilized with the container directory container storage pools. And these are utilized for replication of just the data to the target server. It doesn't have to do anything with the metadata. However, in conjunction with a Protect Storage Pool command, you will want to have a replicate node command that runs in order to pick up the data and the metadata as well. So the Protect Storage Pool will transfer the data a lot quicker. And once again, this requires having a primary Spectrum Protect server that's using directory containers, and then a target replication server that's also using directory containers. Now, the replication schedule is you'll only be able to retrieve data from that if the node replication has run and completed. So just utilizing the Protect Storage Pool command is not enough. And the Protect Storage Pool should complete before your node replication starts. Okay, moving on, let's look at the Repair Storage Pool command. The Repair Storage Pool command repairs deduplicated extents in a directory container storage pool. It relies on the fact that your Protect Storage Pool command is run, that the target server is up and available, and that the network is obviously up and available as well, and that the target storage pool was not damaged. And so remember, this means if I have some type of damage occur on my primary server's directory container, I can run this Repair Storage Pool command, and it will pull those extents back from my target replication server and repopulate them on my primary server. Okay, defragmentation is kind of like what we do with reclamation in a legacy storage pool, but the difference is that defrag only runs when the storage pool's out of space condition is imminent, and so it kicks in very, very rarely. The server is going to handle all of the allocation and free space management pieces out there, so as an end user you don't really have to do anything for defragmentation, and the reason it runs really rarely is that the server does a really good job on plugging holes with vacant holes with incoming data into the containers. So the need to run this defragmentation is not very large. But the way that defragmentation runs, so that you understand it, is that, first of all, we'll quarantine directory containers when they're full. And the reason we do this is we don't want the algorithm that's out there trying to decide which container to write to even have to look at full container storage pools. And then every hour we're going to run an analysis on these quarantined containers, directory container pools, and see what their defrag level is. And if their defrag level is basically calculated by looking at currently how many extents can we write to that container, and then if we ran defrag, how many additional ones could we write? And then if that number is less than 5, then we just leave it as quarantined until we reanalyze it. If that frag level is greater than or equal to 80, then we would run a defragmentation against it. And if it's less than 80 but greater than 5, then basically we just release that from quarantine and put it out there to be written to again. If you want to find out the fragmentation level of a storage pool container, you can run the query fragmentation command. And if you really wanted to force a defrag, you could run the move container. But like I said, the server itself does a great job of running this and handling it behind the scenes. Okay, Slide 14 talks about some of the new and updated commands that are out there to help with container storage pools. The first one is define storage pool directory. So if you are creating a directory container storage pool, you'll have to run this unless you're using the wizard, and then the wizard will walk you through that. And then you have the define storage pool with storage pool type equals container, or define storage pool type storage pool with storage pool type equals cloud. We now have query container, move container, audit container, query damaged pool, repair storage pool, and protect storage pool. Those are some of the other container-related commands. Some additional stats have been placed out there to see what type of dedupe ratio you're getting. You can look at this inside of the Operations Center. If you just go into the storage pools and hover above it, you'll see, first of all, the percent savings, but then that'll break down into the bytes saved and the dedupe ratio. If you want to find this stuff out of the command line, you can issue a query storage pool, or you can also issue an SQL select storage pool command. That's at the storage pool level. If you want to find your statistics at a node level, you can issue this generate dedupe stats, and it will create a record. And this record is kept indefinitely. So if you want to look at those records in the older records, you can do query dedupe stats. And if for some reason you did want to delete a record, you could do a delete dedupe stats. And then if you want to look at a session level, what kind of dedupe ratio you're getting, you can issue a select command. Slide 16. I spoke about the new server-side encryption. You'll also hear this referred to as encryption at rest for object storage. And this is basically encryption that's used when we are writing out to cloud container storage pools. And the reason for this is when you're writing to a cloud, we want to be able to provide even an additional layer of security to that data. Because if it's for instance, a third-party cloud, it's that container's out of your control, and if you want additional security, we now are able to encrypt all of that. The storage pool encryption is enabled at a storage pool level. If you are at a command line, you can specify encrypt equals yes or no when you do your define or update storage pool commands. And if you're using the wizard in the Operations Center, then for the off-premise cloud storage pools, encryption will be set as on. And then obviously if you wanted to, you could turn it off, but it will be set as on. Now some of the considerations for node replication when you're using the server-side encryption is that currently that data will be unencrypted, replicated over to your target server, and then re-encrypted. So you might look at adding in SSL between the source and replication server there. In the future, a long-term goal will be to have the replication also acknowledge and be able to take advantage of that encryption without unencrypting it. This chart here on slide 16 does show the difference between the new server encryption versus the already existing client encryption that's out there. So with server encryption, the server controls the encryption at a storage pool level. The server manages all of its own encryption keys. It's using a minimum key length of 256 bytes. It signs the encrypted key so that it can detect any type of tampering or corruption. And the data encrypted by the server can be deduplicated. And that's key right there. This data is still eligible for deduplication using server encryption out to the cloud container storage pools. Versus client encryption, this is where your Spectrum Protect client is doing the encryption. The client controls the encryption, and that's at an object level that uses the include-exclude files and the encryption type options in order to determine what gets encrypted. The encryption key is optionally stored on a keyring in your tsm.pwd file, and you get to choose you want AES 128, AES 256, or DES 56-bit encryption. The client does not do any type of signing or tampering proof on that, and the data cannot be deduplicated if it was encrypted on the client side. Now with the server-side encryption, we manage the encryption key at the dedupe chunk level. We have a master encryption key, and this is really important. If you turn on encryption, you have to be very careful to protect this master encryption key, because if that encryption key is lost, you will not be able to restore the data from those encrypted cloud storage pools. So the master encryption key is automatically generated when you upgrade to Spectrum Protect 7.13 or install a new 7.13 instance. And it's going to be stored outside the database in a dsmserve.pwd file. We encrypt that key and we utilize it. We back that up. The encrypted key that's derived from that server password is going to be backed up to with your TSM database backup. So it's critical that that you're doing your database backups, and in order to actually enable encryption on the server side, you will have to issue this set DB recovery protect key equals yes. So if this has not been issued, then you will not even be able to utilize the encryption. So then if there is a disaster, that encryption key is going to be restored with the restore DB command. Now, if you do turn on encryption for these cloud storage pools, there will be a little bit of overhead on that, but it's only about 1 to 2% of the total time required to do a backup. And that's because writing to a cloud is slow in itself. And so the extra overhead to do the encryption gets lost in the wait time that while we're writing out to the cloud. Okay, slide 18. Once again, when you're adding a storage pool in the Operations Center, you'll automatically be prompted for encryption if it is a off-premise cloud. And that's what this slide here on slide 18 is showing. Okay, slide 19. This kind of summarizes what operations can be done on a directory container versus on-premise cloud versus off-premise cloud container. And so starting with storage pool encryption, this is the server-side encryption. That's optional on the on-premise, and it's the default option on the off-premise. Overflow pools, for a directory, that has to be a legacy storage pool or a cloud container. And then for your on-premise and off-premise, we don't have overflow pools. For replicate node, you can utilize those on all of the container storage pools, but the protect storage pool command, which replicates only the data and not the metadata, is only available on the directory containers, as is the repair storage pool command. When we write out to the containers, the directories are file-based versus object-based for our off-premise clouds and our on-premise clouds. You can issue a move container for a directory container. And then as for offline reorgs of the inventory tables, those occur for all different types of containers. Defrag only occurs on directory containers, but the audit container can be run on all three types of containers. Okay, so what I just talked about was our new container storage pool. And container storage pools are fabulous because once you write the data out there, you don't have to fuss with it. They also enable the inline deduplication, they enable server-side encryption, and they enable object-based storage for cloud containers. The container storage pools will improve the amount of data that we can dedupe in one setting, as well as the amount of data that we can manage on an individual Spectrum Protect server. So now we're switching gears and just going to look at some of the functions and features that we updated in general on the Spectrum Protect server. One thing we're doing now is taking advantage of the DB2 online index reorganization, and we're utilizing their cleanup only index reorg. This is in contrast to an offline reorganization that was previously available. One thing to notice is that we'll still get the great performance and you won't have any excess activity log usage, but you will get the same space reduction. You can now remove from your server options file the disable reorg index and the disable reorg cleanup index options. You do not want to include in your server options file for 7.13 allow reorg table or allow reorg index. And then optionally you can include this disable reorg table. And if you want to read a tech note on that, I've included the URL for that. Okay, so now let's switch gears and look at some of the other Operations Center enhancements. The first thing you'll notice when you log on to the Operations Center in 7.1.3 is that it has a new look. It has a much flatter style, which kind of reflects the current directions of GUIs. And it's much more responsive if you try to resize it. If you resize it, you'll see that the panels will change size and that you'll have a scroll bar on the right-hand side. You'll also notice in this overview panel, when you log on to Operations Center, that instead of reading it from left to right like we previously did, now the clients are on top, and then we have our services, alerts, and activities in the middle, and the servers and storage pool data on the bottom. You'll also notice that we now include information about replication on the overview screen. We have additional information for our new container storage pools, in addition to being able to, the wizard that will actually go through and create the container storage pools. If you go into the storage pool area by clicking on storage and then storage pools, you'll now see we tell the container type, we specify if it is a container, and then of course we have our dedupe ratios out there. If you want to add replication servers, we now have a wizard which will walk you through setting up replication pairs. Both of the TSM servers do need to be at 7.1.3 in order to be able to do this, and both the target and source server have to be monitored by that Operations Center in order to accomplish this. The plus server pair wizard is in the storage replication area. And when you click this, you're going to be prompted for a server password if you haven't already set one up. Now, when Replication Wizard runs, it automatically includes all of the nodes to be replicated. And if you do not want a node or set of nodes to be replicated, then you'll want to go into Clients, More, Set Replication, and then turn that replication off for the specific nodes you don't want to replicate over to the target server. Now, this wizard does not sync up policies, so a good rule of thumb is to make sure that your policies are already in sync prior to setting up the replication wizard. If you do have replication set up, you can now go in and take a look at it by going into the storage and then into the replication area. And let's walk through some of these numbered areas that I've pointed out. First of all, we're going to show the workload. And as you can see by number 1 here, the striped portion of the workload is the amount of data that's got to be transferred in order to synchronize the two servers. And then the whole blue line is the total amount of data that's out there. So the striped line is the amount of data that has already been processed during the current running schedule. The triangle here points out the amount of data that we anticipate replicating in this session, and that's based upon the bandwidth you set up, or you estimated to exist between the primary and target server when you set up the replication. And that's just an estimate. If you have multiple servers replicating out to one server, we will show some brackets here, and the yellow shows that they're all connected in and working. If you do have a server that's offline or unavailable, it will show up with a red and black circle next to it, and the portion of the bracket will be grayed out, as you see here next to number 4. Number 5 also shows that server as being unavailable. If we have not been able to connect to that server, we will put a diamond with a question mark next to it. And if it's a down level server, we'll put a circle with an arrow in it to represent that it's a down level server. We have a new concept of a workload direction, and this kind of gives us an idea of the replication trend of how much data we've achieved over the last few days during the replication. So if it's synchronized, you'll get the synchronized piece. If we're catching up, meaning every day we make more progress to becoming synchronized, we'll call it catching up. If we're falling behind, then it'll have the red X. You can also dive deeper and get more details on individual replication pairs by going into the storage replication details. And here you'll see the replication over the last 2 weeks with the workload in dark blue, the amount of data that was backed up on that day in light blue, and the amount that was actually replicated in purple. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see the workload. Once again, how much data we've already processed, how much we anticipate to process in this session, and the total amount replicated. It needs to be replicated. Another new feature is the ability to decommission a node. And you want to utilize decommissioning of a node if that node is no longer needed in the production environment. Now, when you issue this decommission node, which you can accomplish from the Operations Center by going into the Clients, into the More section, and then into Decommission, is that we'll initiate a gradual controlled decommission of that data. But this is really important. If you issue a decommissioning of a node, it's critical that you realize that this action cannot be reversed and that it eventually will cause the deletion of that data. So when you decommission a node, you are saying, first of all, that we're not going to recommission it, that the client node can no longer access the server, that the client's data is no longer being backed up, that the client node is locked and can't be unlocked, and that the node's file spaces are, once all of the data has expired off, we'll delete those off as well. We'll also delete all the schedules associations for that node, and no more schedules will be running against that client node. So this is kind of equivalent from the access level as to issuing a lock node. We have additional pieces if you want to decommission a virtual machine. We have a decommission VM command, or if you want to decommission an Oracle database client, you can do a deactivate data. Okay, on the next slide, we have some policy management enhancements in the Operations Center. If you go into the Services, Details, Policy Sets, you will be able to edit existing policy sets. You will have to first of all select the policy set and then slide the green button over to configure it. And then you can do things like change the number of backups that are being kept. You can go in and if you click on the negative sign here, you can delete a policy set or management class. When we make changes to these management classes, you'll see them highlighted in yellow. You can add in new management classes by clicking on the plus management class button. And then if you want to activate a new management class, you can activate them from the Operations Center. But prior to doing that, you're going to see anything that you've chosen to delete highlighted in red, and then any changes that you will be activating highlighted in yellow. We have also added the ability to look at front-end capacity reporting by going into the world icon and then clicking on licensing. In the TSM 711 version, we showed you back-end licensing. So now if you wanted to compare the front-end versus the back-end licensing, you can simply switch back and forth here. The front-end licensing is based on the size of the primary data that's being protected for the clients. And so the licensing depends on the amount of data that must be recovered to restore the protected files to the latest recovery point. And this is a comparison to your back-end licensing, which is based on the amount of managed data in a primary storage pool. And so if you are using either compression or deduplication, that will lower your amount of managed data. So these are good just for an estimate of what your licensing terms might be, either using it front-end or back-end. Okay, in slide 29, we've made some updates to our client management services. In the last version, we introduced this client management services, and what it does is it allows us to collect the activity logs from the client and to post those error logs into the Operations Center. And in order to achieve this, you do have to install a small piece of code on the TSM client, and this would be the TSM CMS license that's part of the DVD or IBM download site. If you already have the 711 CMS code installed on a client, you will need to update that to the 713 in order to work with the 713 Operations Center. And the reason for this is that we've shifted from the OSLC to utilizing Rust with JSON payload. Another application that we're using the Rust code for is our REST API. And this is going to give you access to most of the same information we utilize in the Operations Center, but then you can format it or display it as you want to see it. And in order to do this, you would go into the world icon, click on Settings, and then click on Enable Administrative REST API. Once that's enabled, then you can utilize the GET, PUT, and POST functions of the REST API to access that data. And we do have this really well documented out there in the tech documents if you want to read more about our REST API. Okay, slide 31. Both the Spectrum Protect client and server have been upgraded to IBM License Metrics Tool version 4. So if you have a customer or are a customer who utilize the IBM License Metrics tool, that's now at version 4. We do have a lot of information out there in a tech note about this if you want more information. If you're utilizing Spectrum Protect in conjunction with GPFS, which is also known as Spectrum Scale or Elastic Storage, Spectrum Protect can be utilized to protect that GPFS data. And we have updated Spectrum Protect to allow for the protection of Spectrum Scale 411. We have a new white paper out there that talks about the active file management, and that will be published out here, and here's the link for that. And we have added support for the snapshot-based backup of file sets with the snapshot root capability. So that has been added to our Spectrum Protect 713 client. Okay, so what I just talked about were the new features and enhancements in the Spectrum Protect server, client, and Operations Center. This last slide talks about Spectrum Protect for workstations, which you might know as either Fastback for workstations or as CDP. And this product it integrates with Spectrum Protect, but just some of the enhancements that have occurred in its 713 version include updates to Java, Liberty Server, GSKit, and upgrade for the TSM API. We've added new CDP browser support for the CDP client, and we've added in some new browser support for our central admin console as well. What Fastback for workstations or Spectrum Protect for workstations does is it protects desktops and laptops by immediately backing up the data once that file closes or is saved. And it backs up initially to the local cache, but then it can send an additional copy off to Spectrum Protect or to a file system or someplace else. So we've also done some small enhancements to the Spectrum Protect client where we've updated the executable and MSI files so that they're signed indicating IBM as a publisher, and we fixed a vulnerability for logjam and the bar mitzvah attacks. On the administrative console, we've done the same signing for the executables, and we fixed an install error where sometimes it would get stuck in the starting and never go on to the running state. Okay, so with that, I've just covered what's new in the Spectrum Protect 713. Please also listen to the additional broadcast, which will cover what's new in Spectrum Protect for virtual environments, as well as our Spectrum Protect for Oracle and the other TDPs. Thank you very much.